Hello there, listeners. It's Susie New from the Australian Society of Anaesthetists, and thank you for listening to our podcast. It's called Australian Anaesthesia, and it's where we talk about all things relevant to anaesthesia here in Australia. For this episode, we are coming to you from the ASA's National Scientific Congress, otherwise known as the NSC, which was recently held in Canberra. One of the things I really enjoyed at the NSC was the opportunity to meet a few of you listeners out there in person. Thank you for coming up, taking the time and discussing the podcast. I really liked your questions, and over the last few episodes, I've been sharing some of the answers, some of the conversations that we've had, and sharing some of my learnings about podcasting. Because I've been reflecting on some of those answers, and I thought some of them are not just applicable to podcasting. I thought they could also be useful for people who give presentations, which is a lot of us, and also people who are interested in developing as leaders, because that's something I'm also quite passionate about. Okay, so for this episode, I want to talk about a phenomenon called vocal fry, and the reasons for this will become apparent in a bit. So what exactly is vocal fry? Well, anatomically, there's various reasons as to what causes it. I'm no speech pathologist there, but what it comes across when you hear it is a gravelly, rattling kind of sound, as if your vocal cords are vibrating and creating a sizzling or frying sound, which is how it gets its name. So vocal fry was a really big deal in the social media content creating podcast world for a while there. And there seemed to be almost, this outrage, especially for women who had vocal fry in their videos on social media. I have certainly interviewed people and we'll be chatting normally, everything will be sounding great. And then as soon as I put a mic in front of them or tell them that we're starting to record, they start speaking with vocal fry. So yes, I definitely notice it as a podcast interviewer. So I think in those situations it's developing because the person is suddenly becoming a bit nervous. Or perhaps, and I doubt it's the case, perhaps they're getting too relaxed. I know I sometimes do it. I can hear it in the editing all the time when I'm speaking at the end of the sentence, especially when I'm signing off at the end of the episode. So no doubt, listen for it at the end of this episode. I'm sure you'll probably hear some fry in my voice at that time. So is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, there has been some research which showed that women who speak with vocal fry in job interviews may damage their job prospects. So that means less success in getting a job. Therefore, people have said it can be a bad thing. It can represent a lack of confidence, a lack of authority, a lack of charisma. So when I'm in that situation that I mentioned before of chatting with someone and then they suddenly change and develop vocal fry, I might try and chat with them a bit longer and know that I'm not going to keep that part of the conversation in the podcast because I want them to try and relax and get back to that confident, authoritative self, which I know they are, before we get into the meat of the conversation. You don't get to see that side of things because that's the beauty of not doing live recordings and being able to edit and give you hopefully a polished sounding podcast. Now, if you don't have that luxury, just say you're going for that job interview or, oh my goodness, exams, then one way I've heard of overcoming it is to think about energizing your full sentence. So the last word that you say in your sentence has just as much energy as the first word. I appreciate that can be really hard when you're often trying to think about what you're going to say next. There's some other tips that vocal coaches suggest, such as warming up your voice. But I think before you even go into that, the first tip is to notice it. Do you have vocal fry? And do you want to do anything about it? And I'll get into that in a bit. Because I want to introduce our guest first of all, and I hope he needs no introduction, and he certainly, by the way, doesn't express vocal fry. We're chatting today with Professor Ed Mariano, who was one of the keynote speakers at the recent National Scientific Congress. Professor Mariano is the Vice Chair in the Department of Anesthesiology at Stanford University in California, and is also the Chief of Anesthesiology at the Veterans Affairs Palo Alto Healthcare System. He's published over 300 articles. He's received numerous awards for physician executive excellence and distinguished service. He's also won awards for education, and he's a past president of the California Society of Anesthesiologists and has held various leadership positions in the American Society of Anesthesiologists, and he's an editor of Anaesthesia. Before we get into that conversation, I also have another important introduction, and I'm proud to say that for this episode, I've handed over the mic to Dr. Tom Neal-Williams to host this episode and chat with Professor Mariano. Dr. Neal-Williams is a registrar here in Melbourne and is a hardworking member of our ASA Communications Committee. He joins the committee as a resident or pre-vocational doctor, and I think at the time he might have been the most junior person to be on an ASA committee, certainly in my time anyway. And he's been a really valuable contributor. You might have seen him in a few videos, and now here he is hosting his first podcast interview. And with this introduction, I want to come back to my earlier comments about vocal fry. As I mentioned, there's been some influential discussions about reducing or eliminating vocal fry. If you listen carefully, you might find that Dr. Neal-Williams speaks naturally with vocal fry. Am I worried about this? Not at all. Vocal fry is much more common in men, particularly those with lower voices. I believe it's an integral part of the Finnish language. Famously, Sean Connery used it when he played James Bond. If you think about how he introduces himself, I'm Bond, James Bond. That's my attempt at vocal fry, by the way. So I'm not speculating here whether Dr. Neal-Williams is Finnish or whether he's the next James Bond. He may well be the next superstar of the anaesthesia screen, though. Which brings me to that last tip that I mentioned before about vocal fry. The first thing, I believe, is to notice it. Do you have vocal fry? And then the next is to decide whether you'd like to do anything about it. I hope you agree with me when you listen to this episode that Dr. Neal-Williams does not need to change his voice. All right, with that, many thanks to Dr. Tom Neal-Williams for letting me discuss vocal fry and for being such a fantastic guest interviewer on the podcast with Professor Ed Mariano while on site at the ASA NSC. Let's get into it.
Shall we get into the questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
So to start off with, you've been involved in quite a few different things, particularly in the regional space, in leadership, in research. What would you say has been some of your crowning achievements or things that you're most proud of?
I think if I back up about 20 or more years, I would say that I think my aspirations as a physician were initially never really tied into doing much more than patient care. And I think that that's important. I think I started getting interested in medicine for all the good reasons that most students get interested in medicine. It's so unique to be a physician and have the kind of impact that we have on humanity, on your community. I think because of that, the various paths that I've taken in my career in the last couple of decades have all been somewhat related to that. When I'm in theater and I'm taking care of a patient, I have 0 degrees of separation between me and affecting patient outcomes. When I've gotten involved in education, I consider that 1 degree of separation. I think that everything should somehow be 1 degree of separation or less directly related to patient care. So when I teach someone, when I teach a trainee, or if I'm in a congress and I'm teaching an audience, if they take something that I'm speaking about and they can use that in their day-to-day practice to help their patients, then that's 1 degree. And I got involved in research as a consultant. I never thought I would do research. I was never interested in research. I avoided it as in university. I avoided it in medical school. I avoided it in residency up until the end of my training. And then as a consultant, I worked on getting a master's in clinical research. When I was getting interested in research, it was always about patient care. And so I thought, well, if I could ask clinically relevant questions, I could find answers, then maybe if I could share that information, that also could be used by people who read that work or people that I teach to hopefully help their patients. And then I got into organized medicine and leadership, and I think that really has to do with trying to affect the environment in which we practice. I think as physicians today, there are so many external pressures, there's so many external influences on the practice of medicine. And it's not enough to be an active educator or to do good research, when in reality, there are so many legal and regulatory issues that affect how well we can take care of our patients. And so I think that when I started getting involved in leadership from the standpoint of organized medicine or societies, as well as being an administrator in my local facility, it was really about creating the environment that would allow physicians like us to do what we do best, which is take care of people.
It's certainly a very noble central goal that you have, and it's really nice to see how all of those different facets of your career kind of feed into that. I suppose as a trainee myself, how do you try and impart that goal on trainees as well?
You know, I think that the most important thing you can learn, especially as an anesthetic trainee, is how valuable what we offer in terms of patient care is. I think that understanding that your impact on the patient's life in that brief moment in the span of their life while they're undergoing invasive procedures or surgery is so meaningful, because you really, in those minutes to hours, you're the ultimate patient advocate. You're practicing personalized medicine in a way that no other physician really gets to practice. And I think that sometimes we forget, when you have a busy list and you're worried about first case start on time and turnover time.
I want to get out on time.
All of
yes.
those things. I think it's very easy to forget that, to be present when you're taking care of those patients, to understand that patients under anesthesia are the most vulnerable patients there are in the hospital. They can't make any decisions for themselves. They're completely dependent on you as their physician and as their advocate to do what they would want you to do. That kind of trust is so unusual in medicine, where you can meet a patient and their family sometimes just minutes before you render them unconscious. They have now entrusted you with their life, literally, and to make decisions on their behalf, especially when it comes to deciding when to intervene and how to intervene.
Sometimes I think that it's quite an art form to develop that trust in that very brief window before you can do that. So it's certainly a very privileged position. Certainly transitioning to research quite late in your clinical life, so to speak, and leadership positions, I'm sure that would have come with many challenges. What would you say would have been some of the more significant ones? One
of the most difficult things that I realized as a consultant going back to do graduate education is that work doesn't stop. And so you have to still had to put in my clinical hours. I still had to take my on-call as assigned. I had classes that were in the late afternoon or evening or on weekends, and I still had to take exams. One of the most logistically difficult things that I had to face was a transition between all in-person classes and all in-person exams to online exams. And this is in 2005, so this is a long time ago. So definitely much more commonplace now than it used to be. I remember being told by one of my class instructors that I hadn't turned in any of my homework assignments. And I asked, well, what do you mean? Like, I did all my homework assignments. And she said, well, you didn't go into the online classroom and turn them in.
That's like my worst fear.
I was forgiven. I was able to turn them in. I showed them I actually did my work. But it was very embarrassing. And I realized, like, wow,
sometimes that student life never escapes us.
Times have changed.
I'm sure also going through your journey, you've had many people that have acted as mentors and inspired you throughout multiple facets. Do you have any particular standouts?
There's so many, and I think I would say in very different aspects of my career, I think. I've always been someone who tries to be fairly open to saying yes to things, and sometimes maybe too much so. But I also think that when I try to look at my career in hindsight, it's very difficult to know whether something that looks like work is actually an opportunity. And you don't always know where that's going to lead. When I'm trying to think about, well, should I do it or shouldn't I not do it? I try to think of a couple of things. Like, one is this something that is directly relevant to what I'm doing? And that's sometimes true. I also think, well, is this something that I could just learn something new? Even if it's not directly relevant, if I learn something new, a new skill, maybe navigating a new system, then that might be useful for something else. And then the third, which often is the one that tends to pull me in to say yes, is the person who's asking me someone who has either already helped me before or could help me in the future. If you're asking you to do something and it doesn't fulfill one or two, but this is someone who has helped you already or is in a position where they may be able to help you in the future, then I tend to lean towards yes, because it's very difficult to know how to connect all the dots. But I'm sure that my saying yes in previous years for things that maybe didn't seem obviously relevant probably led to a lot of other things. If I had to name a few people, I would just say, and there are just too many. So this is going to be a very, very abbreviated list. But one in particular is Ron Pearl, Professor Ron Pearl at Stanford. He was chair at Stanford for 22 years. He started as chair right before I started residency. He was actually the chair and also the individual who convinced me to be chief resident of my class. And then when I had to find that first consultant job in San Diego, he is the one who called the chair at University of California, San Diego to find out if if they were interested in hiring me. I had no idea how to find a job. So Ron Pearl helped me find my job.
It's
and
an
then,
art form, I think, sometimes.
It is. And then when I came back to Stanford, after being at the University of California, San Diego for 6 years, it was Ron Pearl, who was still chair at Stanford at the time, who took me out to dinner when I was doing my interviews and made a very good case for coming back. And so I've been back for 15 years. So the list is extremely long, but I would say that because Ron Pearl is the one who found me my only 2 jobs, that's probably the most influential person in my career.
Certainly one that's helped you a lot, at the very least.
For sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate asking the questions and getting some really interesting responses. I hope you thoroughly enjoy the conference and looking forward to seeing some of your presentations.
My pleasure. Well, congratulations to you and good luck in your training as an anaesthetist. It is the best job in the whole world.
I love it.
And success to me, I think, especially in a physician career, because we work for so long, is that if you can go years, decades, and still get excited about what you're doing, then you're doing it right.
I don't know a lot in life, but I know that this is what I want to do, and I think that's a solid win.
You're on the right track.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation and were as impressed by Tom's interviewing skills as I am. I hope you enjoyed the warmth and intellect of Professor Mariano. He really is that friendly in real life too. It is not surprising to me that he has won awards for education. I went back and watched his talks that he delivered at the NSC and they were so well delivered. You can tell he really cares about us taking knowledge away. He wants this educational experience to be valuable. If you also want to listen to his talks, then the ASA NSC is now available on demand. If you have already registered for the Congress, then you should have by now received an email with a link to the on-demand content. You can also access it via the conference app. If you haven't received that email or you can't find it through the conference app, then please do get in contact with the conference organisers. If you didn't register for the Congress, then don't worry, it's not too late. You can register for on-demand access, which is open for 3 months after the NSC, so that will take us through to the 21st of January in 2026. So perhaps a little bit of light viewing over the summer, or maybe before the end of the CPD year. I'll put a link to how you can register in the show notes. There's lots more educational resources on the ASA website for anaesthetists at all stages of our careers, whether you're a pre-vocational doctor or you're a subspecialty expert. You do need to be an ASA member to access them. More information about the benefits of membership as well as how to join can be found on the ASA website. And again, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. In the meantime, I hope you're getting all of your CPD done, especially as we are approaching the end of the year. And as always, stay safe, stay well, be kind to each other out there. It doesn't cost anything. And thanks for listening.
This has been Australian Anaesthesia, produced by the Australian Society of Anaesthetists with many thanks to host and editor Dr. Susie New, with music by Soda Lime Music, sound and engineering by Bearview, and graphics by the ASA Communications team. For more content, please visit www.asa.org.au.